It is an autumn morning in the year 79 CE. The air in Campania is crisp, carrying the sharp scent of salt drifting in from the Bay of Naples, mingling effortlessly with the rich, yeasty warmth of freshly baked bread from the local pistrinum. Inside the bustling bakery of Paphidius Priscus, massive basalt millstones driven by blindfolded, exhausted mules grind grain into fine flour. Slaves carefully pulled perfectly scored, carbonized loaves, the ubiquitous panis quadratus, from the blistering heat of the stone ovens. Here, beneath the shadow of a sprawling, silent mountain, the citizens of the Roman Empire go about their daily labor, entirely unaware that their world has only hours left to live. We frequently measure the ancients by the scale of their monuments, or the formidable continent-spanning reach of their legions. But in Pompeii, history did not preserve a grand imperial triumph. It preserved an ordinary Tuesday. This is not a tale of imperial hubris, nor is it a saga of warring kings. It is the anatomy of an ordinary tragedy. It is the story of a bustling, complex society swallowed by the earth and trapped forever in the exact moment the sky fell.
To truly comprehend the death of Pompeii, one must first understand the perilous, fertile cradle that gave it life. The geography of the Campanian plain is a landscape fundamentally defined by extreme, hidden violence. Far beneath the sun-drenched vineyards and the shimmering blue waters of the Mediterranean, the African tectonic plate is engaged in a slow, relentless subduction beneath the Eurasian plate. This grinding, unseen friction generates colossal pockets of superheated magma, forcing them upward through fissures in the Earth's crust. For hundreds of thousands of years, the volcanic activity of this region, including the catastrophic Campanian ignimbrite eruption some 39 millennia ago, had blanketed the Earth in deep layers of ash, pumice, and pyroclastic debris. While lethal in its formation, this volcanic fallout eventually weathered into a soil of unparalleled, almost miraculous fertility. It was rich in potash, phosphorus, and vital minerals. The Romans, observing the staggering agricultural bounty of the region, named it Campania Felix, the fortunate countryside. It was a landscape that defied normal agricultural limits, frequently yielding up to 4 distinct harvests in a single year. Verdant olive groves and heavily laden vineyards draped the undulating hillsides. The volcanic slopes of Mount Vesuvius itself were terraced with grapes that produced incredibly potent, highly sought-after wines, exported in heavy terracotta amphorae across the known world. The bounty of the earth seemed to be an eternal, unwavering promise from the gods. The earth had given them everything, an irony that would only reveal its devastating, apocalyptic cost when it was far too late. Long before the city of Rome cast its formidable imperial shadow over the entire Mediterranean basin, Pompeii was already a highly coveted prize, a strategic linchpin in a fiercely contested landscape. Constructed upon a prehistoric lava spur that provided a natural, elevated vantage point, the settlement overlooked the mouth of the river Sarnus. It was founded in the 8th century BCE by the Oscans, a prominent Italic tribe, who recognized the site's unparalleled potential to control both inland agricultural traffic and coastal maritime trade. Over the subsequent centuries, Pompeii became a crucible of clashing civilizations. It was heavily influenced by the sophisticated, seafaring Greeks who established colonies nearby and subsequently dominated by the Etruscans. By the 5th century BCE, the rugged, fiercely independent Samnite warriors descended from the Apennine Mountains, conquering the city and imposing their own distinct architectural and cultural footprint upon the volcanic bedrock. Pompeii's integration into the Roman world was not a peaceful assimilation, but a bloody, violent subjugation. During the social war in the early 1st century BCE, Pompeii rebelled against Roman hegemony. In 89 BCE, the ruthless Roman general Lucius Cornelius Sulla laid siege to the city. The indelible scars of Sulla's artillery, heavy stone balls hurled by formidable torsion catapults, can still be seen pockmarking the ancient limestone blocks of the Herculaneum Gate. Following its capitulation, Sulla forcibly transformed Pompeii into a Roman colony, formally naming it Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. He settled thousands of his veteran soldiers within its walls, violently displacing the local Samnite elite, outlawing the native Oscan language, and imposing strict, Latinized administrative structures. Yet, this brutal Romanization also ushered in an era of unprecedented economic expansion. By the 1st century CE, Pompeii had evolved from a contested fortress into a vital, cosmopolitan artery of global trade. It was not a capital, nor was it a seat of supreme imperial power. Rather, it was a thriving, deeply pragmatic provincial microcosm of the wider empire. The river Sarnus served as a bustling, chaotic highway. Ships of every draft and origin docked at its port, unloading exotic spices from the east, fine glassware from Alexandria, and countless enslaved people destined for the auction blocks. In return, Pompeii funneled the immense agricultural wealth of the Campanian interior out into the vast, interconnected network of the Mediterranean. The true engine of Pompeian wealth, however, was found in its local industries. Chief among these was the production of garum, a pungent, highly fermented fish sauce that was the absolute staple of Roman cuisine. Factories lining the coast macerated fish intestines and blood with salt, leaving them to ferment in the relentless summer sun until they liquefied into a rich, umami-laden condiment. Entrepreneurs like Aulus Umbricius Scaurus amassed staggering fortunes through this trade, to the extent that his sprawling villa featured intricate floor mosaics proudly depicting his own branded garum amphorae. Similarly, the textile industry dominated the urban landscape. The city was dotted with phalanxes, ancient fulleries, where the raw wool of Campanian sheep was processed, dyed, and washed. In a stark reminder of the harsh realities of ancient labor, enslaved workers stood waist-deep in vats of fermented human urine, collected from public latrines, relentlessly stomping the cloth to utilize the natural ammonia as a bleaching agent. This was a city built not on the abstract philosophy of senators, but on the relentless, profitable, and often grim rhythms of commerce. In the decades immediately preceding its annihilation, Pompeii experienced a profound golden age of prosperity, a period where the overarching peace of the Pax Romana allowed for unprecedented urban development and societal refinement. Walking through the narrow, cobbled, sun-drenched streets in the mid-1st century CE, a visitor would be immediately struck by the sheer density and chaotic vibrancy of human endeavor. This was a city of approximately 15,000 souls, packed tightly within defensive stone walls that enclosed an area of merely 160 acres. The street plan was a fascinating hybrid. The strict, rational grid system of Roman urban planning forcefully superimposed over the older, meandering pathways of the ancient Samnite settlement. The streets themselves were marvels of practical engineering, paved with massive, irregular blocks of dark grey volcanic trachyte The thoroughfares were deeply rutted by decades of iron-rimmed wheels belonging to heavy wooden merchant carts. Because these streets also served as the primary drainage system for torrential rains and the constant, overflowing runoff from the city's aqueducts, the Romans engineered elevated pedestrian stepping stones at every intersection. These massive stone blocks allowed citizens to cross the thoroughfares without stepping into the muck and rushing water, while precisely spaced gaps permitted the axles of standard Roman carts to pass seamlessly over them. It was a society meticulously ordered, deeply practical, and utterly convinced of its own absolute mastery over its environment. The architectural landscape of Pompeii was a profound testament to Roman civic pride and the insatiable desire for public display. Towering above the expansive, paved plaza of the public square, the Forum served as the beating, unyielding heart of political, religious, and economic life. It was a space designed to intimidate and impress, flanked by the majestic, two-story limestone colonnades of the basilica, which housed the law courts and commercial exchanges. At the northern end, dominating the sightline, stood the imposing Temple of Jupiter, its formidable Corinthian columns casting long shadows over the bustling crowds below. Adjacent to the religious sanctuaries lay the Macellum, the city's primary meat and fish market, where a central, 12-sided tholos contained a pool for cleaning fish, its drains still choked with the scales of the final day's catch. Nearby, the grand building of Eumachia, financed by a powerful, wealthy priestess and patron of the Fullers' Guild, highlighted the immense social mobility and economic clout available to the most successful citizens, regardless of gender. But the true, intimate essence of Pompeian life was found away from the monumental grandiosity of the Forum, deep within the intricate labyrinth of its residential districts. Unlike the starkly segregated, socio-economic zoning of the modern era, Pompeii was a vibrant, chaotic tapestry where patrician elites and plebeian laborers existed cheek by jowl. The grand, sprawling villas of the wealthy, such as the famed House of the Faun, or the House of the Vetii, hid their staggering opulence behind blank, unassuming, and often windowless street facades. This architectural introversion was designed to block the noise and stench of the public thoroughfares. Upon crossing the threshold, however, a visitor was instantly transported into a private world of astonishing beauty, calculated symmetry, and sensory indulgence. Sunlight poured from the open sky through the compluvium, a rectangular aperture in the roof, reflecting brightly off the shallow, shimmering water of the impluvium pool below. This light danced upon walls adorned with breathtaking, vibrant frescoes. These masterful paintings, executed in vivid cinnabar reds, deep Egyptian blues, and golden ochres, depicted violent mythological scenes, intricate trompe-l'oeil architectural vistas that created the illusion of deep space, and tranquil, verdant gardens populated by painted birds. These artworks transform confined, windowless stone rooms into expansive, dreamlike sanctuaries. Beneath the feet of the patricians, intricate floor mosaics, composed of hundreds of thousands of minute, perfectly cut tesserae, depicted everything from fierce marine life to tragic theatrical masks, serving as a permanent exhibition of the homeowner's immense wealth and sophisticated Hellenistic tastes. Beyond the atrium lay the peristyle, an open, colonnaded garden planted with rosemary, myrtle, and climbing roses, where fountains trickled quietly, providing a cool, secluded refuge from the sweltering Campanian summer. Yet, mere meters from these opulent enclaves, separated only by a single stone wall, the relentless machinery of the working-class city ground on. The infrastructure supporting this dense population was an engineering marvel that rivaled any modern municipality. A highly sophisticated aqueduct system, a branch of the massive Aqua Augusta, fed a central castellum aquae, a water tower, situated at the city's highest point near the Vesuvius Gate. From there, a complex network of pressurized lead pipes buried securely beneath the pavements distributed continuous, flowing water to dozens of public fountains, private patrician homes, and the monumental public bathhouses. The Stabian and Forum baths were not merely places of hygiene, they were the vital social epicenters of Roman daily life. They featured towering vaulted ceilings decorated with intricate stucco reliefs of mythological heroes and a masterful hippocaust system. Slaves labored in stifling, subterranean furnace rooms, tending roaring wood fires that circulated superheated air beneath the suspended floors and upward through hollow terracotta wall tiles, providing a luxurious, steam-filled sanctuary from the brutal toils of the day. Everywhere one looked, the city was vibrantly alive with the written word. The plastered walls of Pompeii served as a dynamic, communal canvas, covered in thousands of painted and scratched inscriptions that captured the immediate, unfiltered voice of the populace. Professional signwriters, working by lantern light in the dead of night, painted bold, red and black electoral notices, urging citizens to vote for specific magistrates in the upcoming municipal elections. Elaborate advertisements promoted forthcoming gladiatorial games at the Grand Amphitheatre, promising spectacular beast hunts and providing the names of the most famous, heavily armoured fighters. Beneath these official pronouncements, a sprawling undergrowth of casual graffiti preserved the mundane thoughts, petty grievances, debts, and romantic laments of ordinary people. Prostitutes advertised their rates, school children practiced their alphabets, and rivals hurled crude insults at one another. It was a society operating at the absolute peak of its vitality, a testament to the ingenuity and sheer organizational prowess of the Roman world, utterly and completely convinced of its own permanence. However, the very geological forces that had gifted Campania its extraordinary agricultural wealth were quietly preparing to reclaim it. The tragic turning point for Pompeii did not come in the form of a foreign invading army breaching its gates, nor from a catastrophic internal economic collapse. It stemmed from a profound, fatal misunderstanding of the earth beneath their feet. The Romans possessed brilliant engineers, stoic philosophers, and unparalleled military tacticians, but they possessed absolutely no science of volcanology. In fact, the Latin language of the 1st century CE did not even contain a word for volcano. To the busy citizens of Pompeii, the towering, verdant peak of Mount Vesuvius, rising majestically just 8 kilometers to the north, was merely a benign, ancient mountain. Its sloping flanks were blanketed in dense vineyards, thick forests of oak, and wild boar habitats. Its summit, a jagged, broken caldera left over from eruptions millennia past, was perceived as a quiet, completely dormant plateau. They were entirely oblivious to the apocalyptic reservoir of magma that lay concealed miles beneath the lush vegetation. The first formidable, terrifying warning of the mountain's reawakening arrived on a fateful day in February of 62 CE, a full 17 years before the ultimate catastrophe. A massive, shallow earthquake, estimated by modern geologists to have been of a magnitude of 5 or 6 on the Richter scale, violently ruptured the Campanian plain. The seismic shockwaves tore through Pompeii with devastating force, fracturing the vital aqueducts, collapsing the heavy, tiled roofs of the basilicas and ancient temples, and leaving deep, jagged fissures in the frescoed walls of the patrician villas. The destruction was catastrophic and widespread. Yet, the Roman response was characteristically pragmatic, stubborn, and deeply resilient. They did not abandon the city. They did not interpret the violent trembling of the earth as a divine mandate to relocate. Instead, they immediately commenced a monumental, decades-long campaign of urban reconstruction. Shattered marble columns were bound with iron clamps. Toppled statues of the emperors were re-erected in the forum, and exquisite frescoes were simply repainted over the cracked plaster. Life slowly, stubbornly resumed its frenetic pace. This very resilience, however, bred a fatal psychological complacency. The citizens of Pompeii had successfully normalized the danger. Over the subsequent 17 years, minor tremors and localized seismic swarms became a frequent, widely accepted part of daily life in Campania. They were viewed merely as an annoyance, a rattling of bronze cooking pots in the kitchens and the shifting of terracotta roof tiles, rather than the ominous, escalating drumbeat of a reawakening geological leviathan. By the late summer of 79 CE, the warning signs grew alarmingly acute, yet they remained tragically unrecognized for what they truly were. Deep underground, a colossal column of magma was steadily rising, violently fracturing the bedrock and displacing the local water table. In the final, tense weeks preceding the eruption, the lifeblood of the city began to fail. Ancient, reliable springs mysteriously dried up, and the heavy lead pipes of the aqueduct ran empty, forcing citizens to rely on stagnant cistern water. The air grew unseasonably stifling, deadened by an oppressive, windless heat. The earth trembled with increasing, terrifying regularity, causing the sea in the Bay of Naples to recede slightly and surge violently against the shoreline, killing schools of fish. Yet, because they had survived the Great Quake of 62 CE, the people believed they could survive this as well. The bakers continued to grind their grain, the merchants continued to tally their wax ledgers, and the politicians continued to fiercely campaign for civic office. The ultimate hubris of Pompeii was not one of imperial arrogance, but of tragic, profound ignorance, an inability to comprehend the sheer, planetary scale of the natural forces marshalling against them. They believed they had mastered their environment, permanently domesticating the landscape with their aqueducts, roads, and agriculture. They were entirely unaware that they were merely temporary tenants residing on a geological time bomb, and that their lease had just violently expired. The illusion of permanence shattered entirely shortly after midday. The earth violently tore itself open, with a deafening, catastrophic roar that would have ruptured the eardrums of anyone in the immediate vicinity. The immense plug of hardened rock that had sealed the throat of Mount Vesuvius for centuries was blown into the stratosphere. In an instant, the pressure cooker of the subterranean magma chamber was violently depressurized. A colossal, terrifying column of superheated gas, pulverized rock, and pumice shot upwards at supersonic speeds, reaching a staggering altitude of nearly 30 kilometers. Across the bay in the naval port of Messina, the young Roman scholar Pliny the Younger observed the apocalyptic spectacle from a safe distance, later describing the towering volcanic plume as resembling a vast Mediterranean umbrella pine tree, its trunk rising straight into the heavens before spreading out across the stratosphere in a terrifying, bruised canopy of churning darkness. In Pompeii, located a mere 8 kilometers downwind, the horror was immediate, suffocating, and absolute. The sky, which only minutes ago had been a brilliant, sunlit Campanian blue, rapidly turned to an unnatural, sickly twilight, and then, terrifyingly, to pitch black. The sun was entirely blotted out. The towering Plinian column, having reached the very limits of the stratosphere, began to cool and collapse under its own immense, unimaginable weight. It unleashed a relentless, hissing rain of lapilli, light, porous pumice stones, mixed with dense, grey ash. At first, the falling stones were small, roughly the size of coins, clattering harmlessly against the terracotta roofs and the paved streets. But as the hours agonizingly dragged on, the sheer volume of material accumulating in the city became overwhelming. The pumice fell at a rate of approximately 15 centimeters per hour, rapidly choking the narrow streets, filling the opulent impluvium, pools, and burying the elevated stepping stones. The citizens of Pompeii were violently thrust into a desperate, chaotic calculus of survival. Total darkness enveloped the city, illuminated only by the terrifying, jagged flashes of volcanic lightning arcing through the ash cloud above. Many chose to flee immediately, braving the debris-choked roads in a frantic, stumbling exodus toward the sea or the surrounding countryside, desperately tying pillows to their heads with strips of linen to protect against the relentless, heavy barrage of falling rocks. Others, perhaps trusting in the sturdy masonry of their homes, or completely paralyzed by the unprecedented, otherworldly terror of the event, chose to shelter in place. It was a fatal, irreversible decision. By midnight, the city was buried under nearly 3 meters of loose pumice. The sheer, crushing weight of the accumulating debris began to decisively compromise the architecture. The heavy, timber-framed roofs of the villas, bakeries, and public buildings, structures never engineered to bear such colossal loads, began to groan under the stress. Eventually, they violently collapsed inwards, crushing those who had huddled beneath them in the suffocating darkness. The air itself grew increasingly toxic, choked with noxious, sulfurous fumes, making every frantic breath a desperate agony. Yet, the true, inescapable mechanism of Pompeii's destruction was still to come. As the first light of the following day struggled and completely failed to penetrate the dense, swirling ash cloud, the eruption entered a new, devastatingly lethal phase. The towering volcanic column, no longer possessing the thermal energy required to sustain its immense height, began a catastrophic series of structural collapses. This triggered a succession of pyroclastic surges, hurricane-force avalanches of superheated gas, pulverized ash, and molten rock that roared down the flanks of the mountain at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. These ground-hugging clouds of death were utterly inescapable. The final, most powerful surges struck the walls of Pompeii with apocalyptic force. The temperature of the surging, toxic gas was estimated to be in excess of 300 degrees Celsius. As the lethal cloud violently enveloped the city, seeping into every doorway, window, and cellar, death was instantaneous. The sheer, unimaginable thermal shock caused bodily fluids to boil, skulls to fracture, and muscles to contract violently, drawing the victim's limbs inward in what forensic pathologists call a pugilistic stance. The suffocating wave of fine, incredibly hot ash then blanketed the dead, packing tightly around their contorted bodies and sealing the entire city under a silent, impenetrable tomb of volcanic material extending more than 6 meters deep. In a matter of merely 24 hours, a vibrant, highly sophisticated Roman city had been entirely erased from the face of the earth. Its bustling streets were permanently silenced, its majestic architecture buried, and its inhabitants frozen in their final, terrifying moments of despair. For over 1,500 years, Pompeii lay forgotten, a mythical city lost beneath the overgrown vineyards and quiet farm fields of a new, oblivious era. The world moved on, empires rose and fell, and the exact location of the buried Roman hub faded from living memory into the obscure realm of local folklore. It was not until the late 16th century, and more earnestly in the mid-18th century, that the picks and shovels of Bourbon excavators finally breached the silence of the compacted ash. What they slowly, painstakingly uncovered was utterly unprecedented in the annals of human history. Pompeii was not merely a ruin of stripped, barren stone. It was a miraculous, deeply tragic time capsule. Because the city had been buried so rapidly and completely by the volcanic material, depriving the environment of oxygen, the normal organic decay that usually claims historical sites was abruptly halted. The ash had formed a rigid, impenetrable mold around everything it touched. In the mid-19th century, the pioneering Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli realized that the mysterious, hollow cavities repeatedly discovered in the compacted ash layers were, in fact, the exact negative impressions of decomposed organic matter, wood, doors, and human bodies. He devised a brilliant, hauntingly simple technique, pouring liquid plaster into these subterranean voids, before carefully chipping away the surrounding ash. The results were profoundly shocking, capturing the imagination of the entire world. The plaster casts revealed not the idealized, stoic marble statues of emperors and triumphant generals, but the excruciating, visceral reality of ordinary human beings in their final, agonizing moments of existence. A mother desperately shielding her child, a man huddled in a corner with his hands clamped over his face to block the ash, a chained guard dog writhing on its back in a desperate struggle for air. These artifacts transcend mere archaeological evidence. They serve as a direct, intensely emotional bridge across 2 millennia, forcing us to intimately confront the suddenness and terror of their end. The tragedy of Pompeii provides us with the most intimate, comprehensive understanding of daily Roman life ever acquired by modern historians. We know exactly what they ate, how they voted, the gods they prayed to, and the fears they harbored. Yet, the ultimate legacy of Pompeii is not merely a fascinating catalogue of ancient domesticity. It serves as a formidable, enduring monument to the absolute fragility of human empire and the ephemeral nature of all our grandest endeavours. We build our cities of stone and steel. We engineer our complex societies to conquer and commodify the natural world, and we persistently tell ourselves that our civilizations are eternal. But the silent, empty streets of Pompeii, forever frozen in the imposing shadow of Mount Vesuvius, remain as a stark, objective reminder the Earth is profoundly patient, and the architecture of our doom is always ordinary, waiting only for the ground to shift